Welcome everybody back to the After Dark Show. I am Don Rogers. I am really happy this week to have a guest that I had been talking to for about the last 6 months, and things never quite worked out, but I'm very happy that she's been able to make it now. And she's actually from right here in Alberta. She is a member of the Canadian First Nations of Northern Alberta, and her name is Allison Yellowknee, and she's going to be sharing, she's had lifelong paranormal experiences and ET experiences, and she's going to be going into some of those today, as well as some of her family's experiences that she was a part of it in her younger years. So without further ado, thank you so much for taking the time in this horrible warm weather. We are in Alberta and it is crazy right now. About 10 minutes before we started recording, I'm just going to squirrel here really quick. We're in the middle of a heat wave. There's forest fires, and I just got a tornado warning.
Oh,
So, gray summer in Alberta, but thank you, Allison, for being here and welcome to the show.
oh, thank you so much, Dawn, for inviting me. I've been wanting to connect with you as well. I know timing never worked, but I'm grateful to be here. And if you get the tornado warning, you better let me know, and we'll do this again. Yeah. Um, did you want me to introduce myself right now about that, or yeah?
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and get into your own, well, maybe start where your family was originally from. And you actually have my interest in that because my partner and I are actually looking at moving and buying land in Northern Alberta. So I would love to know about the activity up in the area as well. So
Okay,
if you want to get your
sure.
family's lineage and that all started. And
Okay, so back before or during fur trading here in the city of Edmonton, my family originated here on on the lands here around Edmonton, and that was the Papastrace First Nation. I think it was back in the early 1900s that as the city was growing, they pushed the natives off of the land. So the nation was dismembered. They were all taken apart. They pushed everybody different directions. So some went to Enoch, some went down south. My family actually went north to the Wabasca region. My grandmother, then the last name was Gladue, and that was kind of a common name for Papastrace and for Big Stone right now. So I'm from the Big Stone Cree Nation. I would have to say because my grandparents lived there, when we applied for treaty status, we all became treaty members of the Big Stone Cree Nation. I know Papastrace is still trying to, um, be an urban reserve because right now it was native land and it's been taken over. So I know there's some areas of the city that they're trying to claim as Papastrace land. Um, in saying that, I didn't know much of the history before because my grandmother never really talked much about the Papastrace and how, I know when it came time that they were looking at membership again, they contacted us and said, you need to get signed up. So we all signed up. It was probably in the 90s, and they're still trying right now. Papastrace is still trying to be recognized under the Alberta or the Canadian the rules, I guess, around First Nation. So I think what I'll start now is about this, my grandmother. My grandmother's name was Clara Gladue, and that was her maiden name. So Clara Yellowknee is her married name. Um, she raised all her children in the Wabasca region. And from there, it wasn't until my first u.f.o experience in 1979 that I learned more about her life and her experiences. And I'm not sure if we want to say it was like a family secret, or maybe, there was just things she didn't want to go local with, but she was pretty vocal about her experiences to us, her family, of her u.f.o experiences. So I know my grandfather had doubts, but when you have experiences, how do you doubt that? But again, I think it's just people didn't want people to know. But I'll share one story of theirs. So I don't know exactly when, but it was in the early 70s. They were driving back from Northern still, so Trout Lake, Peerless Lake to Wabasca, which is probably about an hour and a half. And at that time, all gravel road. As they were driving, they saw moose. My grandfather got out of the vehicle, shot the moose, and it ran into the woods a bit, and then they followed it where it dropped. And from there, they were like hauling meat back to the vehicle back and forth. And as they were at the moose, probably on their third or fourth round, they saw a green light shining through the trees. And that kind of spooked them, and they didn't even want to investigate. They said, well, let's just go. So they left, they went back to their vehicle. My grandfather's hands were on the wheel, and my grandmother was the passenger. Just then, the green light shined into their windshield. And the next thing they remember is they're still sitting in the same position. Grandfather still hands on the wheel, but it was hours later. And when they looked in the back, the meat that was in the back was glowing, kind of green. So they like drove home. They're probably, I don't know exactly how far they were, but they were pretty quiet all the way home and not sure what to do because they knew they experienced something, but they made it home. And when they got there, the meat was still glowing green. So they discarded the meat without, having it analyzed because we didn't know what to do back then, right? So
Well,
that,
no, you
yeah. So that was one of her experiences that we all know about is about that. Another time she was through a few women going to some, she was like a part of they call her like a Métis warrior woman because she was really about the rights, human rights. And so her and a group of ladies were heading home, and there was a UFO flying right above them. And the ladies were all screaming. The vehicles came to a stop. The vehicle didn't run anymore. Everybody was scared. They didn't know what to do. They're all screaming. And my grandmother was trying to keep everybody calm because obviously she was quite aware of what was happening. Eventually, the UFO left and they got in their vehicle and drove home. So that was another big story to the community. Um, so that's only a
um
couple of them.
shoot, I just got mind wiped there. I was going to ask you something.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, I have that happen to me a lot. Um, does your band, like, do your people have any particular beliefs when it comes to beings from other galaxies or dimensions? Like, I know certain bands of natives do have belief systems in place when it comes to beings from other galaxies, dimensions, or realities. I'm just wondering if yours does as well.
Well, not the band in particular, but there have been elders or medicine people out of the community that are aware of our contact. In fact, I've heard of Sarge Band, which is near Slave Lake, that they were actually were in a sweat, and in that sweat, the gray aliens sat in the sweat with them. And so I still yet have met that elder and know more about that. But it's been very common that some of our people have been connected. Where our family disconnect happened, I'm not sure if it was the residential schools that caused that, or if there was something, during the Papa Stray's time. It's kind of cut off at that point. So in my years of research, I've always tried to find connection to Papa's Chase or anything to do with the land and area. But yes, there is two elders that I've been in touch with from the community who do talk a lot about um, the aliens, but they talk about them as being like messengers and our allies. Um, but it didn't really sit right with me because I know what I've experienced. I didn't feel like it was positive. I think at any time, if someone's taken from against their will and experiments are done on them, you don't feel like you're, you know, um, there on a good purpose. So,
No, I've heard story. Well, I've had experiences on both, and like I won't get into my whole back history because my listeners have heard it a dozen times. But like I have SSP memories and Arcturian interaction and all kinds of things that have been brought back via regression. So I don't like to say I know exactly what you're feeling, but I get it, right? So no need to over explain. I've had the unpleasant as well as the pleasant, so I
right.
totally understand.
Um,
Do you want to get into like some of your first experiences with them, or
yeah, I'll share a little bit of that. I was gonna mention one of when it comes to the experiences I've had and the memories that it's all my conscious memory. I haven't done the regression yet. In fact, I've had two elders tell me I shouldn't do it. They figure I've come a long way in my healing and getting away from the fear because I had post-traumatic stress from all this. As a child, I was an insomniac. So I had a lot of fears growing up, and they don't recommend that I do the regression because they said you'd already know enough in your life to, you don't want to disrupt your well-being now. So I didn't do the regression. I still want to, but not yet.
Uh,
Mhm.
if you're comfortable where you are, I would tend to agree with them. Um, I only ever underwent my regression because my life was disrupted by something in my subconscious. That's the only reason I sought out a regression. And I will say, definitely vet the person doing it. There's some things, some healers shouldn't be healing when they're not healed, is the best advice I can get. So definitely, as in any energy worker, you want to vet your person very well,
I
is the
totally
best advice.
agree. Yeah. So
Yeah.
um yeah, I agree. So that's kind of probably why I decided not to do it. I've had opportunities throughout probably the last 20 years. And again, it was like knowing that right person. And I haven't found that person yet. Well, I did, but she's in the States. And I thought, well, maybe one day I'll meet Yvonne Smith because that's who I was going to connect with. Um, so name dropping there. Okay, so I'll start with my first experience. So 1979, I was 7 years old. My brother was 5, and my little brother was only 7 months old, and he was in a walker. So we were all in a small little trailer next to my grandmother's property or her home on her big property. I'd say she has maybe 10 acres on this property, and it's all lakefront. So it's all like a cliff, and it's a beautiful lake down there. And while we were there, my mother and I had some relatives visit from out of town, my auntie and my cousins. And my aunt and my mother decided to go to Slave Lake, which is 135 kilometers. And at the time, it was all dirt road, one way in, one way out. No hospital in Wabasca. It was a small native community, but not a reserve. Wabasca is actually a hamlet surrounded by the reserve. So I recall this like it was yesterday. It was my mom and aunt went to Slave Lake, and we were left with my 13-year-old cousin, and her name was Glenda. We were all sitting on the sofa, and the way my sofa was, I was sitting with my back facing the lake. So there's no property lights, there's nothing, no lights back there in the lake. So as I was sitting there, I saw lights hitting the trailer walls above on the top. And I thought, well, where is that coming from? And I looked out the window, and that's when I just saw it was like the underside of the craft. If I was to say how it was a large craft, like my grandmother's property, about being 10 acres, this was probably the size of 3 acres. Because when I looked up and out the window, I couldn't even see the sky. I just saw the craft, and it was humming, a very deep hum. And as it came closer down, the trailer started to shake like we were in an earthquake. And I recall we're all running around. We're like, what is this? My cousin couldn't figure out what it was. And my 5-year-old brother and I ran and hid under the kitchen table because everything was shaking, like with pictures were falling off the walls, items were falling off the countertops and table. So we hid under the table, and it was just chaos. My cousin was running back and forth. The sound, it was that humming noise. Wasn't that it was loud, but the vibration, I think, is what it was that really hurt the ears. Um, and my little brother, who was 7 months old, was in his walker, and he was like hands up in the air in terror. And we didn't know what to do. We're all like every man for himself kind of thing, right? And I remember pushing him closer to the under the table. And then the next moment, it was like flashes of memory that I have in this event. So the next memory is my brother, 5-year-old, is no longer in the trailer, and we're looking for him. And my cousin's screaming and looking for him. We couldn't find him anywhere. And then the next memory is now I'm looking out the living room window, looking towards the lake, and I can see the craft now. It's a saucer-shaped craft. The typical saucer-shaped craft that we see. It also had, like, I would call it like a belt of color that went around the um, circumference of the craft, and it shined light outwardly. So, and as it was going fast and slow, it's kind of to the tone of the humming. So it went fast and then slow. And as I was watching this thing, I also saw a beam of light from the bottom, under the craft, into the lake. And as I was watching this, I could see it was sucking up water, and it was like a stream, but you can see the water flowing. There was light then. It was dark outside, but that's where the light source of light was coming from. And then as the sucked up the water, all of a sudden it just was gone straight up. And like we didn't even see it go. It just all of a sudden it was gone, but we knew it went up. Um, and just shortly after that, my mother walks in and we're like, Mommy, Mommy, did you see the UFO? Like we're all panicked. So and where the property is and the road to get to Slave Lake, it would have taken them probably 10 minutes to get to the point where they could actually see the point. So I thought in my brain that they only went that far, saw the UFO, turned back around. So I thought this was only minutes that gone by. And so when my mother walked in, she had been gone for 4 hours. So we were sitting there, not sure what happened. We're all crying. My cousin was sitting in the corner, kind of in the fetal position, and she was not responding. She was like in shock or whatever they did to her. So my 5-year-old brother and I, we were screaming, Mommy, Mommy, there was a UFO, and the house was shaking. And, and my mom was a clean freak. So she just looked around and said, what happened here? She wasn't listening to us. She just noticed the mess. Was calling to my cousin saying, what's going on here? What happened here? She was still in uh, a daze. She still didn't even respond. Meanwhile, my little brother, who was in the walker, was struggling to breathe. And she said, what happened to Steve? So she picked him up and she was like trying to, console him, but he was gasping for breath and his eyes were rolling up on top of his head. And his mouth was wide open. And so she was patting him on the back like this. And I was sitting behind, and all I saw was his eyes roll up, his mouth opened up, and he went stiff. Like his arms are straight out, his legs were straight out, just a stiff baby having a major convulsion, or we don't even know exactly what they would have called it, but he stopped breathing. He was the stiff, scary looking baby. We all started screaming again. My grandmother, knowing that she had these experiences, my mom said to Glenda, go get Clara. So just as she was walking out the door, my grandmother was coming in and checking on us because she had seen the UFO with my other cousins, so she knew something had happened. But my mom was in a panic, handed my brother to her, was not breathing. We all went to my grandmother's house, but my mother had to literally drag me and my brother Darren, like she was dragging us because we were all like, we didn't want to go outside. We are pretty scared of what was happening outside. So when we got to my grandmother's house, she laid my brother on the kitchen table. My auntie thankfully just had first aid training, and we all sat in the living room and I can hear her saying, he's not getting oxygen. There's something blocking his breath. So she opened up his mouth and she said there was like thick foam at the back of his throat. And she literally used a spoon to scoop it out. It wasn't like the usual saliva foam that somebody has when they're having, it was different. And when she finally cleared all that out, she managed to bring him back by doing CPR. And when we heard him crying, it was like a sigh of relief. Everyone started crying again. And my mother and auntie drove him back to Slave Lake because there wasn't a hospital in Wabasca at the time. So, and so the next morning, so we all had to stay at my grandmother's house and all of us cousins in one room, and we're all talking about what happened, the UFO, and everybody was scared. We were all huddled together. So the next morning we felt brave, right? It's the daylight, it's sunlight. We're all going to go look for maybe little foot tracks. So there was a fresh blanket of snow. We thought we could find any remnants of what happened. And we didn't see anything. So I looked across the lake and I saw my father coming. Him and my uncle and grandfather were across the lake hunting, and I saw them coming. So I stood at the top of the lake and the property, and I was waiting for my dad to come up. I said, Daddy, Daddy, did you see the UFO? Because they were just across the lake. I thought they would have seen it. And he says, what are you talking about? I said, there was a UFO. And The house was shaking, and of course, 7-year-old, and I spoke fast. He didn't know what the heck I was saying, right? And then the only thing he picked up on was, Stevie almost died. He stopped breathing, and now he's in Slave Lake. And that's when my dad dropped everything and ran to the house. And I'm chasing him, but Daddy, there was a UFO. He wasn't paying attention.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say he was hospitalized for just one night. The doctors only said that they think he might have had a reaction to aspirin, but he wasn't given any aspirin. They just had no explanation to what happened.
So they needed to write something on the paperwork, so they were got it. Um, Given that it was your firsthand experience, I always have this question when I talk to people with experiences. Do you think interdimensional or extraterrestrial? Because there seems to be both in this reality that we live in, and some people experience the extraterrestrial beings, some people experience beings from other dimensions, and some people experience both. So with your experience, which would you lean more towards?
Well, this one was extraterrestrial, but I've had what you're talking about, the interdimensionals, and of course the dreamlike, where I've actually been in crafts and or underground. So I've had a variety of different ones. I've had experiences where I went through like a vortex, or I used to call it a kaleidoscope of colors because I didn't know how else to associate that. But I remember like going through like wormholes, I guess what I would call them now, and getting dizzy from that. And I had one experience, I'll share this, which I haven't shared this one very much. But during one of those travels because I astral traveling, I ended up traveling through this wormhole, and all of a sudden, I was the universe. I was everything and nothing. And that freedom and love of experiencing that was so amazing to me. I think I was about 8 when I had that, but I was everything and nothing, and I was actually in the universe with the stars and all the different. And then all of a sudden, just as quick as I was just feeling and understanding that we are everything and nothing, I all of a sudden went back to the wormhole again. And then I was so tiny that I was like a grain of sand, smaller than a grain of sand. It's like I went that far down. Um, and when I was everything and nothing, I knew I could not fit on an earth or any planet because I was everything and nothing. Like it's hard to explain. But when I went down to that grain of sand, I realized that they're trying to show me something without them being in my presence, because I know if I would have saw them, I would have went into panic mode again. So I think they're trying to show me something, but I felt that now as an energy worker and working with energy as the past 15 so years, you learn a lot about energy from that.
With your people's connection to the earth, you'll be one that'll understand this probably better than most of my guests. Recently, I've come to the realization that pretty much everything on earth is sentient. So, like when we're interacting with the grass and the trees, and that was something that an ayahuasca shaman that I had on the show helped me come to realize is like because we're sentient and because we can communicate with everything here, to have a truly universal experience, we're going to be that blade of grass, that grain of sand. We're going to be that cloud. We're going to be that deer. We're going to experience everything there is to be about this universe before we transition. Is is that a similar belief to what you guys have, or is
Well, I'll say that I didn't grow up knowing my culture that well. I knew about the hunting, the tanning hides and making dry meat and all that stuff. But when it came to my culture, I didn't learn about my culture till I was an adult and working for a Native organization here in Edmonton. It was like so I went through this not knowing like why we're going to this Catholic church, why there's just didn't make sense to me. I didn't feel a connection. But it was not until I learned about, and I've always had a connection to nature. I've always been like collecting rocks as a child, and even today, I've got like bags of rocks that I've collected because I just felt a connection to those rocks, right? And even now today, I use crystals and regular rocks. But knowing, I think as a child, as I was learning about my own abilities as well, because I think the start of these experiences opened me up to more paranormal things and more awareness, energy awareness, but not like there'd be times that I would not feel afraid in the forest because I'm thinking I feel safe there. I'm protected there. Um, but I do believe, like now, as an adult and someone who's learned about the culture, learned about energy, I agree. We are all energy. We're all connected. I saw this wonderful video with people standing by trees, and they're like, "Tree, touch my shoulder," and the branch came down and touched their shoulder. It's amazing. And I'm like, hey, I've done that with clouds. I've cleared the clouds a lot of times. And my cousin will, like, she was taking a highway trip to the States and she called me. She said, Allison, I can't see a thing. Can you please clear the clouds? Because I did have done it before. And so I focused on her. When I focus on people, I focus on energy bubble of protection around that person or their vehicle or whatever. And I also was focusing on doing this clearing with my hands, like clear a path so she could see. And then she called me and said, Allison, oh my God, it worked. But it's like I've got a clear path down in front of me. So she's always one who's always called me when she's needing a path cleared.
I love that because that's actually something me and my partner have been experimenting with is like we're just starting to get an understanding of all of these things you can do with your actual intention. And
Mhm.
one of the things she did a few months ago was for another driver, because there is a spot when you go into Airdrie that there is almost always a cop. And she was driving behind this guy and she's like, "Oh, buddy, turn on your lights. You're going to get a ticket." And like a half a second later, buddy flipped his lights on and sure enough, the cop was sitting there.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was just, that's pretty cool. Like if you come from places of pure intention, I think the universe is a lot more happy to oblige you. And
And I agree, even to pets and even just regular animals. So I shared the story today at work today, actually, was where I live in the city, crows, oh my gosh, the crows wake me up at 4:30 in the morning and all you hear is gah, 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 gah. So it was constant. And so I realized that these two crows that were making a big ruckus were actually just outside one of the bedroom windows. And when I looked out there, they were like literally maybe 5 feet away from me in the tree. And I said to them, guys, I'm trying to work here. You're really loud. Can you take this somewhere else? And you know what? They flew away. Um, so I don't know if it was just my voice or what, but they flew away and left me alone. So I think we all, right, can communicate with everything and every living thing. Again, it's about intent. Like I wasn't telling them to like, I wasn't being rude to them. I was like, hey guys, I'm busy. Just trying to reason.
no, and there seems to be a lot more of that as more people are becoming aware of this stuff. Like we, I can't even remember the lot. We haven't had a subscription to television in years, and we just watch movies every now and then. We spend more time outside. Like we have magpies where we are, and like they'll have entire conversations. There's ones that we call Heckle and Jekyll because you can tell they're siblings, and they'll sit there and fight over one peanut. There'll be 50 peanuts, and they'll fight over one. So these two brothers, and we call them Heckle and Jekyll, and it's like they don't even mind. I can get from, like you're saying, I can get like 3, 5 feet away. I've almost hand fed one of them. And it's like, this just started a couple of months ago when all of these understandings of how things actually work start coming online. And it's just absolutely fascinating. I know we've gotten way off topic of
Oh, I
the alien,
know.
but I just love that conversation. Um, too.
And I think it's all connected too. Like I believe that the more and more we become in tune with our own energy, whether we receive that from experiences or if it's just as we are evolving as we get older. But I always often wonder if my abilities came from them. Because some of the things that I've I can't, I don't want to like, I don't like to use a psychic, but I've had a lot of premonition dreams and they've come true. And I can identify when it's actually a premonition or just a dream. So I think, and again, I don't know if that's all from having these experiences. Because I know I had one person tell me, I've had a lot of, I call them messengers that cross me in my life, whether I'm sitting at a bus stop or standing at a crosswalk, to cross the light. I've had people say to me, "Oh my God, do you realize you're connected to a UFO?" And I look up, oh my God, they found me. And she said, "No, I mean in your lifetime." And I'm like, yeah, I'm aware. She said, well, you should be very lucky. You're one of the chosen ones. You should be very blessed. You should feel very blessed. At that time that this was happening, that was in the early 90s that this interaction happened. And I said, excuse me, you don't have any idea what I went through. I wouldn't feel grateful and to be chosen to go through what I've been through. I said, to be taken from your room, to be experimented on, to be continually taken over and over again and not even know why. I said, to me, that's not feeling blessed. And then she was smiling at me and she said, dear one, it'll come to you sooner or later. You'll know what your purpose is. And it wasn't until later that I put things together. Um, of what my experiences were, why I was having these multiple experiences from the age of, well, I had an experience in when I was 8 years old where I woke up on a stretcher like bed and I felt like I was underground. It was echoey, it was dark, the walls looked like rocks. And, but all I could see was just, I could only move my eyes. I felt like I had something holding me down. I had no movement and I can hear another person crying. And what it looked like from where I was at, there were like transparent curtains or that were dividing me and the other girl. But I could see from my eyes that she had a light source over her head and I had one over my head, but I couldn't actually see what the light was. And then I said, where are we? And it echoed like a deepest echo I've never heard since. And she said, they're coming. And I saw the two beings that were tall walk other side of the transparent curtain to her. She started screaming, and then there was no sound. And then they came to me, and they looked like they had robes on. That's all I could say. Like you couldn't see their face, but they had this huge syringe needle, and one of them injected it into my heart, and I felt the cool liquid fill my chest. I all of a sudden I couldn't breathe. I stopped breathing and I felt like I was falling, like falling off this bed. Um, and then after that experience, well, I I I woke up and all of a sudden now I'm like running to the back of my house. But where the wall is, I could see through the wall. And all of a sudden, so you're talking about interdimensional. Um, I went through the wall and I was like slow like molasses to get to that wall, but once I went through the wall I was running full speed down the hallway to the living room where my parents were saying, you're supposed to be in bed hours ago, what are you doing up? And I said, mom, I said, they put a needle in my heart and I went through the wall. And like, of course it doesn't sound very, when a child's talking, like they think, oh, you just had a bad dream, go back to bed, but I was like shaking, I was scared, I was traumatized. And I remember like it was about that point on that I became an insomniac because I was having so many experiences at night that I was afraid to sleep. But the next couple days, like I was listless, my heart hurt to take a deep breath. I couldn't take a deep breath. I was always like talking at the end of a breath, like, mom, can't breathe. And finally, and I was having this massive headache, which I was 8 years old. I didn't know what a headache was. I just knew that my whole head hurt and I had my heart hurt. I couldn't breathe and took me to the doctor. Second day, she thought I was faking it. Took me to a doctor and I remember sitting on that doctor's table and he said to me, so Allison, how long have these symptoms been going on? And I said, ever since the aliens put a needle in my heart. That was my response to the doctor. The doctor looked over at my mom. My mom shook her head. And the doctor said, well, Allison, you have a very vivid imagination, but I think you're going to be okay, right? I don't remember even
Yeah.
checking my heart or giving me x-rays, nothing like that.
Well, first I have to ask because you kind of caused a flashback there. When you're talking about that, would that be like a brown or red brick and almost like a catacomb that you were getting wheeled through?
I was already laying in the bed and it was like a stretcher like bed and I felt like there was something covering my body. That's why I couldn't move. But that's all. But what I do remember is when I did get away, because I did get away and I'm running through that tunnel and I'm running through it. and they were behind me, chasing me, but I didn't get too far, obviously. But I don't
Yeah.
remember anything else, just the two beings and the stretcher I was on.
No, I was just wondering, see, checking for similarities.
Yeah. Well, if you notice,
I have a very vivid remembrance of being in an underground tunnel on a stretcher when I was like 5, and so it just kind of question.
well, and similar to Travis Walton's or the movie that the scene, of course, the Hollywood one, when he's being dragged through that hallway, kind of like it was the same kind of thing. It was like a tunnel locked. It looked like it was a rocky tunnel, not smooth. It was pretty bumpy. I remember the texture for sure. Hmm.
Yeah. One of the other things you were talking about, and it's my own personal theory, but I think a lot of their technology has to do with frequency and vibration. And I
Hmm.
think that's probably why, when you had the experience when you were little, you heard that overwhelming hum, because I think it's some type of frequency manipulation. And I think that is the most logical explanation I can ever come up with as to how they pass people through or pass through people's buildings to be able to come and go, is with the understanding that everything is molecules. Molecules all vibrate at a certain frequency. If you change the frequency, you can change the construct of it and just reach right through things.
Mm.
So if you were hearing a high vibration or a low vibration, it was likely changing the molecular structure of whatever was involved that they needed to manipulate. That's just kind of my nerd take on what you were saying, but
And that makes sense because, like I mentioned, like I went through the wall of my home. I can see the hallway, but there's usually it's a wall, it's a house. And but when I went through it, all of a sudden I was so yeah, I totally agree that there had to have been some form of manipulation for that to happen and for me to remember it. Yeah.
yeah. And I don't know why, but I've just been on this crazy road with figuring out how everything works lately with like, this is weird, but I again think I'm probably telling one of the right people that might understand what I'm about to say. I asked the universe, I had a friend ask me if I thought this was a simulation. I asked, like, I went into meditation and I was like, I'd really like to know if this is a simulation or the Matrix. I woke up like the next day and all of a sudden understood quantum physics.
That's interesting.
I'm a high school dropout. I was I have no other word for what I now understand than it was a gift from the universe. I
Wow.
just woke up and quantum physics and now understand how like a lot of these things can be manipulated strictly through frequency and vibration. Like uh, Tesla said it. If you want to understand the universe, learn about frequency and vibration. He was actually onto something,
I
right?
agree. I
But
totally agree.
I really do think that's where a lot of their tech comes from too, though, because they've mastered that they can shift beyond our frequency, beyond our perceptions, and in and out of our realities with these things they've figured out.
Yeah. I always often wonder because I did a lot of research, but when you get into the UFO research and everything, there's so many branches. If I look at it as a tree, there's so many branches to look at, and I just didn't have enough time in my life to research everything, right? As much as I wanted to. I was
Yep.
raising three boys, and trying to work and everything else on top of everything else I'd experienced. So
Yeah. No, and that's where people like me, where it's just like I found out I had attention deficit disorder when I was 18 years old. And my doctor's like, "Oh, you have this thing called ADD." And I'm like, "That's nice." And he's like, "Oh, do you want medication?" I'm like, "Why?" I'm 18. I'm already done school. I've learned how to work with this. And I think that's why when I get like hooked into something, I can be like just this hyper focus of that part of my mind, and it doesn't affect the rest of whatever I'm thinking about. And then my mind just comes back to it. It's like, oh, we figured this out. And I don't know, but I think that's also why they medicate kids with ADD. And that's not medical advice. Please don't take my video down. Uh, but no, I really do think it's misdiagnosed. If you can learn to use ADD, you can actually use it as an educational tool rather than a deficit. And that's the only reason a grade 10 dropout understands quantum physics. Like,
And you're right about how I feel the same way about the over medication of a person's I don't want to say personality, because not everybody is, so for example, I have a friend who's a Sagittarius extrovert, you know, I would call him ADD. Then I know somebody who's like a Libra introvert. So I really put a lot of I don't know, thought into astrological signs and how that personality trait is. So I've kind of done a lot of research on a lot of different topics, not just the UFO stuff, because of course, I wanted to find commonality with other people, which I have over the years. And that's where I finally felt like I was home, because all my life I didn't have, like, even though my grandmother had experiences, it wasn't somebody I could talk to all the time. She was kind of a difficult person, and maybe didn't, I don't know, at the time I didn't feel like I was loved like the other cousins, but it wasn't only till I started to sit with her and get to talk to her, is when she would tell me these stories. But other than that, I didn't have anyone to talk to about this. And I think that's where I always felt different, alone, like there's something wrong with me. Um, Actually, I'll share another story from when I guess I was 8 years old. Yeah, so I just moved back to Slave Lake from Wabasca, and I was in grade 3, and the teacher had an assignment for us. We're all supposed to write about our most memorable experience, and as an English um, I guess, project. So I was excited because I thought I can write about my UFO story. And of course, back then I had probably a lot more vivid memory. I wish I had that article now, that story now. But so I wrote about my UFO experience, the one I told you with my brother almost dying and everything. Um, and everybody was writing about the pony they got or the trip to Disneyland, and I'm writing about a UFO experience. And some people got to stand up and read their story, but all the rest of our projects were at the back bulletin board. We had to go and grab our story. And mine had a big F with a red circle on it. And I remember like crying, thinking, what did I do wrong? Like, I wrote about something. And she called me to the back, said, "Allison, I want to talk to you." She said, "I'm sorry I gave you an F, but you had to write about something that was real." I said, "That was real. That was real." And she says, "Well, no, we need to make sure it's something." I said, "It was real. My brother almost died and he was brought to the slave." I was trying to explain, as an 8-year-old, trying to explain what I experienced. And then out of the blue, she just says, "Okay, if they're real, why are they here?" And I just, no word of the lie, didn't even know some of the words that came out of my mouth. But I said, Wabasca is abundant with natural resources. Okay, those not something a kid from grade 3 would say. I didn't even know what a word abundant meant or what natural resources were. We didn't learn that in school yet. But that's what came out of my mouth. And at that time, that was in 1978, 1978, 80, around there. And at that time, Wabasca was just a native community, one way in, one way out, nothing. And it wasn't until 91, 92 that they actually went into oil exploration in the area. And exactly what I said, Wabasca is abundant with natural resources. And yeah, so there's been oil and gas exploration ever since. So I wouldn't have known that at my age. And um,
I seriously think there's sometimes, and like I've had this conversation with my partner a couple of times. I think we come back here with our memories in each experience, and we're a lot more intelligent up until about the age of 10 or 11 than we even realize, because we actually still have our memories. And this was one of the things that I'd have been 10 because I failed grade 1, but when I was in grade 4, I came in second in the science fair for an invention that I could not have possibly figured out on my own. It was actually developed in the 50s, but I was like 9 or 10, so I didn't know. We had the science fair that year was like, "Oh, it's environmental. You have to do something for the environment." At that age, I developed and drew blueprints for a counter-mounted can crusher that reduced your soda cans to like 1/10 the size, and had my dad, who was a sheet metal worker, build it for me.
Oh,
Now, at 9 years old, how? Right?
yeah.
So I absolutely get that sometimes we get higher stages of consciousness or awareness or information. And I think it gets blocked off as we get older. And like I said, I think we're actually a lot more in tune with it when before we get messed with by society. But
Yeah, education system and their religious system. That's how I look at it.
yeah, the military complex running the education system, the government, yeah. But yeah, it's all meant to do to corrupt and confuse and make you forget who you are.
Yeah.
And like literally, my fiance thought my cheese was sliding off of my cracker for me to all of a sudden have any spiritual awareness. Don't get me wrong, up until like last year, I was pretty sure ghosts were real and I saw a UFO when I was back in 93, 94. Right? That those things I knew. Anything outside of that didn't exist. I didn't know anything about energy. I didn't know anything about the occult. I didn't know anything about any of this.
Mhm.
It just all kind of hit me the one day when a stage of my consciousness from a different space and time started to bleed through into this one. And I ended up having to get my QHHT regressions to have that figured out, which basically was like a past life regression, but it's kind of parallel. But
Right.
so I absolutely understand that like we are in touch with things that we don't even understand fully yet as the beings we are. Right. And I don't know if it's our ancestors. I don't know if it's stages of our consciousness trying to help us out. Like, what is your kind of take on that higher sense from above?
Well, I believe, like you said, that we're conditioned to forget about where we belong, where we come from. And I think if we can raise our children to keep that awareness and that's something that I couldn't, I tried. I tried my best to have my kids keep their abilities as well. But as they, same thing, got older, it just, I don't know if it's something, you know, how we talk about the crown, how the baby's crown is open when they're born, and as they get older, it closes. I often wonder if that is also a part of what changed in our connectedness, where we should have had. Um, but it's hard to say. And those are just some of the theories that I've had as well, because I've often thought of the same things. I've researched things and, you know, especially when it comes to consciousness and psychic abilities, all these different things, because I think we all can enhance those abilities within ourselves, given the right space and the support people around us. And I always believe that like-minded people, you know, we're all gonna blend and mix well. I've had a lot of friends who were in that. And I felt stronger in my abilities when I was around them, you know, so I think I do believe that power in numbers.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely agree. Like it's interesting. Like I have found people in the last 6 months to a year that I feel closer to now than people I've known for 40 years because we're at the same, like I've been friends with people my entire life, but all of a sudden I vibrationally match with people I've just met. And it's just a really interesting experience how your loved ones in your community, even around you, suddenly changes when people understand you.
And I agree. The same, like, and the flip side of that, I've known people all my life as well, who, when they find out I've had these experiences, laugh and say, "Oh, you're crazy. I didn't know you're the same thing." I've heard that term, the cheese slid off your cracker, you know, like what happened. And so this has always been me.
Yeah.
It's been what I've had to live with all my life, which was why I was a shy girl. Like nobody even knew I existed because I was the shy girl in the back, head down, barely spoke unless I was spoken to. You know, I was really, because I was so afraid of everything. I was always afraid to look up. I was afraid of my surroundings. It was just, and then nobody would understand what I'd been through. And when I tried to talk about it, yeah, people thought I was crazy. Even, um, oh no, it was a few months ago, I shared a video on Facebook, and a lot of my Facebook friends laughed at me for sharing a story about connected to that video. And you know what? you can stay closed-minded all you want, but there is a lot more to this universe and, sitting on this earth and working day to day. There's so much going on behind the scenes that you're not even aware of, and obviously not choosing to know about it, you know. Um, but I think what I wanted to also talk about here before our time is up is um what I found what my purpose was. So a lot of people, one of the things I always often, well, why me? Why was I chosen? Why my family? Um, um, because I never found that out from my grandmother. I didn't know why we were chosen. Was it supposed to be a special thing where we're supposed to feel, oh, thank you for choosing us? Or like, why is this a curse? Because it was kind of both for me. The experiences that I've had, some of them were actually in my bedroom. Like I remember three grays coming into my bedroom and I was probably about 10, and I knew they were coming. I can feel it. I would feel it in the back of my neck. I'd feel my heart. My heart used to have these pains, of that hard to breathe pain. Like I told when I talked about being 8 years old, I had those all my life, and it always happened around a time when I was having an experience. And so I would always feel it coming, or I felt it something had just happened. Um, so when I was 10, three grays came into my room. And at the time I had back in the day, we had the pajamas that buttoned up all the way to the neck and they were down to the ankle. So that I had one of those. And I was watching over my brothers and their friends, and there was a sleepover. So parents were gone, boys were all sleeping, and I was trying to fight the sleep because I felt something was going to happen. And I'm trying to fight the sleep, thinking, well, they'll be home in a couple hours. I could stay awake. And I could not fight the sleep. Um, Next thing, I see these three beings coming into my room. One was at my feet, and then all of a sudden I couldn't move. He touched my feet, and then I couldn't move at all. The other one was unbuttoning my shirt, and I remember saying, "No, no, no, stop it, stop it." And then they rubbed something on my chest, which at the time I felt it was like maybe ice, because I felt like wet going down my neck because I was laying on my back. And of course I couldn't move, and all I could just feel is this ice pack being rubbed on my chest. And I don't remember any communication, like any telepathic anything. I remember just saying, no, no, stop it. And then when I woke up, um, my buttons were still down, and my neck was wet at the back, and my bed was wet at the back of my neck. So I got up knowing it wasn't the boys, but my first reaction was to get up and go blame them, wake them up and say, what were you doing in my room? How can we put ice in my, like, why did you, and I knew it wasn't them, but in my brain, I had to blame somebody at that moment. Um, so that was an interesting one because I don't know what happened. I just remember seeing that, and that was it, waking up. Um, but a lot of my experiences over the years were pretty similar. It wasn't until I was about, and I was athletic as a young as a young girl. I was in track and field and baseball and all this badminton. I was like second best in Alberta in badminton for our age category, that kind of thing. So I was very athletic at that time. You wouldn't tell that by now, but anyway. Um, so a lot of the experiences that I had were I would um, feel like, okay, that I always had ringing in my ear. I always felt like somebody was always watching me. I always felt like that was always the case. But I remember when I started having stomach problems, I always felt like I was having waves in my stomach and I didn't know what was going on. And I even had put something on my stomach. I don't know if it was like a book or something, and it was moving. And I thought, well, that's weird. I thought, well, am I having stomach spasms? Like, what's going on? I didn't know. And then plus as a young girl, you're going through puberty, and there's some irregularities that could happen as a girl's coming into that. And so the doctor told me that's what was happening, why I'd have, no menstrual cycle for, 3 months, and all of a sudden, bang, blood all over my bed type of thing. And then it was just this cycle constantly. So during those, it's about 3 months of the feelings of something in my stomach, movements, nausea. Another thing about, and this is maybe a bit more personal, but I'll share it because I think it's relevant. Um, as a, so 11 years old, 12 years old, I was lactating. That only happens if you have given birth to a child or breastfeeding a child. So not only was I lactating, but I was having 3 months of no menstrual cycle, and then the cycle went over and over and over again. So my life was like that. I just got used to that.
Do you think I'm just going by those numbers because I've actually heard of people carrying that claim to be in alien breeding programs that carry children for 3 months and then they're taken. Is that something similar to what you're explaining?
Exactly.
Like, is that what you believe?
Exactly. So, at the time though, I didn't know what was happening. Some of the symptoms, yes, were that lactating, the feeling of movement in the stomach. I actually felt an actual flip one time. And then also, which was really weird, was that I don't know if any other women have talked about this, but I had like black gummies in my belly button all the time. And my belly button area always hurt, was always tender. And there was always black stuff in my belly button. Like, why is there black stuff in my belly button all the time? I don't put anything in my belly button, you know. So why do I have this stuff there? And it wasn't until, so over the years, like I was with my spouse since I was six. I met him when I was 15. We were together since I was 16. And when I turned 18, I was kind of young and stupid. I wanted to have a child. All my friends were having kids, and I was the only one who didn't have a kid. But we weren't using any protection from my age of 17 and never got pregnant. And we went through testing when I was 21 to see like why am I not getting pregnant? And they had no answer for us. They said, well, everything seems to be fine, but we just why we couldn't get pregnant. And so it wasn't until we were traveling through BC. He worked for CN Rail, and I traveled with him. We're up in Terrace, BC, and I was feeling good. I finally just put the stress of not having a child away, because the more I worried about it, the more upset I would get when I would find out I wasn't pregnant. So we are in BC. He's working. I'm not doing too much. I went to this native community, and I still didn't know much of my culture then. I learned it from other people. And I walked to the reserve, which is called Kitsim Reserve outside of Terrace. And I walked there, and I walked into this trading post, and there was an elder, and she was making dream catcher earrings. And I've seen them, but I never knew what they were. So I said, so what is that you're making? She goes, oh, they're dream catcher earrings. And then she said to me, do you know what the story was? I said, no, I don't. And she said, well, the bad dreams get woven, they get lost in the web, and then the good dreams will come through like the diamond in the middle. And I said, oh, I've had so many bad dreams all my life. But I told her I always called them wake dreams, because I'd be awake and then I'd be waking up from being awake, and I would have a nightmare or dream of things happening to me in those. She said, I said, I felt like they're really real. Like I've actually woke up with marks on my body and different things. So they're really weird dreams. And then she prayed over me, and she said to me, you're wanting a child. And I said, yes, I've been wanting a child for a while. Now I'm 22 at this time. And she said, she says, take these. And she blessed them. She said, wear them tonight and pray. So I walked back to the hotel with proud earrings, walking through there. I told my ex, I said, oh, you know what? I talked to this lady. She said, I just have to ask, and pray with my earrings on. And he thought I was silly. Of course, maybe I didn't explain it as well as she told me. And so that night, as I was praying and asking for a child, um, I woke up in a room with a woman figure. I could call her a woman figure because I couldn't tell the gender, but just by looking. But the feeling I got was that she was a mother, a caretaker, and she was leading me into this misty grayish blue room. When you go to the produce and it has that little misty water that comes off the produce, it was something like that, just much more finer, of this moisture coming out. And I could feel this misty room, and I saw 2 rows of children, and they're all different sizes, different ages. Some had hair, some didn't have hair. Some had big heads like the Greys, some had regular size heads. Some had the big black protruding eyes, some had regular human eyes. All of these kids, though, they all look different, but I did not. I felt so much love for these children. And as she's walking between the two rows of these kids, and I would have to say there was 20, 20, maybe 18, 20 children. That's just but my memory, because I was in such awe of what I was seeing and all these children. And as I'm walking between the little ones are coming up, and like one was grabbing at my shirt and one touched my hand. And I just felt like I love these kids, and I didn't realize. And then as we got to the end, she turned around and she handed me a baby boy, and she said, "You can keep this one." That's what she said. "You can keep this one." Not telepathically, she said. She didn't say it with words. It was like in my head. And then I woke up and I was like crying because I felt like I just met my children. I just met my children. And she handed me a baby boy. And so I said, Chris, I said, a lady handed me a baby boy and said, we're going to keep this one. And he says, "What? You must have caught a dream," is what he said, right? So we were just kind of joking about it. Well, it was about a week or so later, I was having those heart pains again, a lot of heart pains. And we were on the train from Terrace going back to Jasper. No, Burns Lake. We're going to Burns Lake. And so we stopped at Burns Lake. That's where we're staying. Went to the hospital because I was having those heart pains. I could not breathe. And when I went to the hospital, every time the doctor was in the room, the heart pains disappeared. He couldn't hear nothing. And when he would leave the room, the pain came on. I was like, what's going on? Like, I want him to hear that there's a mist thump going on here. There's like boom, 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 bump. There's like, it's not, there's like a, what do you call it? Heart palpitations. They were different. And I knew there was something different. And he, you know what he gave me? He gave me Robaxacil. And he said, maybe the muscles of your heart are overworked. I'm like, from what? Why would they be spazzing? He gave me Robaxacil.
Yeah.
I'm lining up at the pharmacy, and where I'm lining up, I see pregnancy tests. Grab one, took it home, and it came back positive. I could not believe it because like we had been trying for 7 years, and went back to the pharmacy, got a different one, and checked it out. Meanwhile, my dad's calling me, and he's like in Edmonton, and I'm in a hotel in Burns Lake, and he says, "Is everything okay?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" And I don't tell him yet, right? In case I need to go see a doctor first. And he goes, "Well," he said, "I just had a dream." I said, "About what?" He said, "Just checking to see if you're okay. Let me know if something's up." So I didn't want to say anything because I wanted to make sure. Um, so when Chris got back to the room, he said to me, um, "What's going on? How come, why are you smiling? What's up?" And I had a little card for him. It was like, "You're going to be a daddy," had a baby rattle. And he looked at me and he says, "Is it mine?" I'm like, "Well, it's either yours or the aliens. I don't know." Right. um, so the next day was confirmed that I was pregnant. And from that moment, I knew that my son was going to be born on February 1st, even though when I got to Edmonton, I got a pediatrician and they said, "Oh, between February 14th to 20th. I said, "No, February 1st, don't take any holidays." And throughout my whole pregnancy, I also was part of they were doing this smoking mothers and non-smoking mothers research, and I was a non-smoking mother. So I thought, well, I want to be a part of this because they would be checking me every month, like x-rays, everything, right? And I remember when I went for my first ultrasound, I thought I had an alien in my stomach. So, it because all those symptoms were familiar. The movements in my stomach, the lactating, all these different, I realized how familiar all those symptoms were because I had them since I was probably 11 years old, um, 11 to 22. And so, January 29th, I'm at the doctor, I'm getting close to the end of my date. He says, "February 1st, you're not even dilated, not ready. February 14th is where we're going." And I said, "Nope, don't go anywhere. I'll be there in 2 days." Sure enough, January 31st, water breaks. I'm in labor, 24 hours. He was born on February 1st at 7:30 in the morning. And the doctor came in, he says, "How did you know?" I said, "I don't know. I just knew." And I knew he'd be a boy because they didn't tell us the gender then. So yeah, I think they told me when he'd be born because how else would I know?
That is absolutely amazing. Um, Before we do wrap up, you mentioned that you do energy work. Did you want to let everybody know about that? Like, do you do that where somebody can contact you and have energy work done? And you want to talk about that really quick before we go too?
Yeah, so I got into Reiki in 2005. And it's a long story how I got there as well. But have to say that I was led there. And why I got into Reiki, or I started working for the lady who was a practitioner, and she said, "I'm meant to teach you Reiki. My guide just told me you have to learn Reiki." So once I did that, that empowered me for a lot of different things. It also helped me get rid of the fear that I'd lived with all my life. I was the scared of everything, right? And all of a sudden, I was no longer afraid of anything. So I got into Reiki. I was very much involved in doing Reiki as a part-time job, evenings, weekends. And the more and more Reiki I did, the more intuitive I became, the more balanced I felt. So it really did help me. Excuse me. But ever since COVID, I haven't really had anybody come to my home. Plus, I'm not really set up like I used to be. I always had an extra room in my home where I can offer Reiki. I do Reiki distantly as well, and or visit hospitals, or if somebody wants me to go to their home, I'll go to their home. So I will offer it if it's asked of me, especially when elder asks. I never deny an elder. I just don't bring them to my home. And I live with my two adult sons right now. So when I'm finally back on my own and I have the extra space, I'll be reopening again.
Awesome. And I'm super glad I asked because my partner is looking for an instructor.
Oh, that's great. Well, as a Reiki master slash teacher, that is something that I can do to help. I probably would, though, recommend my teacher, who I call my angel on earth. She changed my life. And I credit her for all the good things that happened to me through Reiki, because without it, I would have never have experienced it and got into it. And we found that it was just a perfect way. So one of the things I'll just share about before that is as a native person, the indigenous healers, what they do is they take that negative energy from you and then they have to go and release it. So naturally, I was doing that. And I didn't realize that I was not releasing what I was taking from people. It was through Reiki that I learned we don't take energy and I don't give mine, we clear the energy. And what a difference that did in my life. And it was a very amazing healing thing. And I love to share my stories about Reiki and some of the miracles that have happened in my sessions.
Well, I would absolutely love to have you back on, or you could actually even be on my partner show. We can figure that out later because she is being drawn towards learning Reiki and like chomping at the bit. So I will put you guys in contact. Um, Thank you ever so much for sharing. I feel like we could have went even further with more stories, and I'd love to have you back to talk about that too.
Sure.
But thank you so much for your time, Allison. It is hot as hell here in Alberta, so I will let you go and not make you sit in front of a computer anymore because I want to go outside too because it's a lot cooler out here than in this damn trailer. So thank you everybody for watching, and thank you so much, Allison. I'm gonna hit stop and then I'll say goodbye.